So, when you think about the Christian afterlife, what actually happens to a martyr? You might assume they get a top-tier reward, right? But what does that look like? Are they all part of the bride of Christ? Or could some just be, well, guests at the wedding? Today, we're diving into this really fascinating theological debate about status, reward, and what it means to be resurrected. And this is the central question that really frames our whole discussion today. It might sound super specific, but trust me, it opens up a huge conversation about heavenly status, rewards, and even the very nature of our spiritual bodies in the afterlife. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to establish the common ground, what both sides actually agree on. Then we'll break down the two opposing arguments one by one. And finally, we'll dig into the key scriptural evidence that fuels this entire debate, from heavenly robes to a famous celestial analogy. All right, first things first. Before we get into the disagreement, we have to understand what both viewpoints are built on. This isn't a debate about who gets saved, but about what their status is after they are. Okay, so both sides are playing by the same rules, and they agree on three core ideas. One, that white robe you read about in the Bible isn't literal clothing. It's a symbol for a resurrected spiritual body. Two, in the first resurrection, only martyrs get this spiritual body. And three, our whole conversation today is focused only on this specific group of martyrs. Got it? Good. Now let's get into the first viewpoint. This argument basically proposes that even among these resurrected martyrs, there's a kind of heavenly hierarchy. Not everyone, they say, gets the same role. The core idea here is actually pretty simple if you think about it. Getting an invitation to the big heavenly wedding feast doesn't automatically make you the bride. I mean, think about it. When you get a wedding invitation in the mail, does that make you the one walking down the aisle? Of course not. It makes you a guest. This argument really hangs its hat on this specific passage from the book of Revelation. It describes this great multitude of people in heaven. So the question becomes, who are they? And what does their presence at this event really mean? So for this viewpoint, it's all about distinction. They see this huge crowd of martyrs, and yes, they're absolutely saved, they're resurrected, they have their spiritual bodies, their white robes, but they're considered honored attendees, the guests at the wedding feast. The actual bride, they argue, is a separate and maybe even more exclusive group. Okay, now let's flip the coin and look at the counter-argument. This viewpoint completely rejects any idea of a hierarchy. Instead, it offers a much more unified vision, arguing for total equality among these martyrs. This viewpoint is incredibly direct. It basically says, look, if you are a resurrected martyr and you enter the holy city of New Jerusalem, you are the bride, period. There are no other categories, no guests, no plus ones, you're in. For this side, it's all about location, location, location. The scriptures say that great multitude is standing right there before the throne of God. Well, according to this interpretation, that puts them squarely inside New Jerusalem. And since they argue only the bride gets to enter the city, it logically follows that the entire multitude has to be the bride. Now here's where it gets really interesting. This deep, complex theological debate, a lot of it actually hinges on, believe it or not, clothing. Yep. Specifically, the descriptions of two different heavenly garments mentioned in the Bible. So on one side, you have the great multitude wearing white robes, but on the other, the bride is said to be wearing fine linen, bright and clean. Argument 1 says, see, two different outfits, two different ranks, guest and bride. But argument 2 fires back, no, those are just two different ways of describing the very same spiritual body. And this just shows you the incredible level of detail in this whole debate. They go right back to the original Greek words to make their case. The question becomes, is a lokos stole, a white long robe, functionally different from lampros byssinas, which means radiant fine linen? That's what they're arguing about. Pretty amazing, right? But it's not just about the robes. This debate over different spiritual bodies also pulls in a really famous analogy from the Apostle Paul's writings to try and prove its point. Now get this. Both sides use this exact same verse about the different glories of the sun, moon, and stars to support their case, but they interpret it in completely opposite ways. So how can one verse lead to two totally different conclusions? Viewpoint 1 takes this verse pretty literally. They say, look, just as the sun and the moon are fundamentally different objects with different levels of brightness, resurrected bodies are also fundamentally different. They believe there's a real hierarchy, with a more glorious bride body and a less glorious guest body. But viewpoint 2 comes back and says, hold on, you're missing the point. They argue it's not the body that's different, it's the glory or honor associated with it. In their view, all resurrected martyrs get the same type of spiritual body, just like we all have a human body. But the honor, the reward, the glory can be different. It's a difference in status, not in substance. And they even suggest that this difference in glory might just be temporary. So let's just boil this whole thing down. The debate really comes down to this. Do these biblical descriptions imply a permanent, literal hierarchy of different kinds of spiritual bodies? That's argument 1, and for what it's worth, the author of our source material leans this way. Or do they just describe symbolic differences in honor for the same type of body, ultimately pointing toward equality? That's argument 2. And this whole thing really leaves us with a profound question about the nature of eternity itself. Does getting a spiritual reward mean there are permanent castes, different kinds of beings in the afterlife? Or is it more like a temporary recognition of honor among equals? It's a question that really challenges us to think about what justice and reward and glory truly mean in the end.